The two amplifiers are set in place. One thing I wanted to show you, if you look right there, that is a floor bolt. The amplifier, it sits back another 1/8 of an inch, but right now it's resting on that bolt. What you do is that is a piece of 0 gauge sheathing over the bolt. On this side, this is just some flex tube lubing. Because there's two pieces of seat that get in the way. You just put that over that. Not that there's a full finger there. But while we were designing and getting everything set up, put this over those two metal pieces to keep it from scratching the bottom of the amplifiers. Put this over that bolt. Went black. Originally it was blue because that's all I had laying around, but we went black so that you won't even notice it. It can stay there because I want to leave it there in case we ever have to service these and I have to pull this amp down. I don't want to scratch the amp at a later date. The speaker wire is run over here. What I did was I only put a minimal amount of sheathing on it, so just up to these points. Now I'm going to finish off the sheathing and run it all the way to the front because they were on two separate amplifiers. Now I can combine the front run. The rear is going to be tapped in right here and the fronts are going to be tapped in the kick panel right over there. At this point, I'm going to get the 4 gauge up and over and all zip tied in place. Skipping through time ahead, we have the last panel all wired up. This panel has the bit 1 HD on it as well as the Zen 8 to B. The Zen 8 to B is going to talk to our factory radio and give us our output. That output is going to be a Toshlink, which is light. So we're going to be using the light to come out of here and come into the inputs on this. That input is located right here. This is the cable for the DRC, which is our controller. The A to B has a remote turn on out that's going to activate this, and then the power and ground is going to go to our distribution block. Looking at the back side, what you see here is the Toshlink. If you'll notice, it is in a nice big loop. It's light. This is a tube of light that's in here. We want to make sure that there are no bends, no sharp 90s or anything like that. That means I went a little bit longer with it than I normally would because I only have this far to go. I wanted to make sure that I could get a nice bends. I don't want anything tight. These are the connections that are going to plug into the factory, and then this is going to be for the DSP. Over here at our power distribution, we have the other end for it. If you'll notice, we have the two big wires which are going off to our big amplifiers, and these two skinny wires here are going to power our peripherals. The A to B will get power from the factory plug, which is sitting right here. However, they do mention that in some cases you may need to connect it to the same power as the amplifiers. So for that, put a connection point in it if we need to do that. Otherwise, it'll just chill out and not get used for anything. That brings us to our third and final piece that we get to put in. Also, the power wire is zip tied up in place and hidden. Now we need to get this piece of carpet put back on and get this piece in place and attach everything up, and we can finalize that. Fernando is almost done running all the speaker wires. We do still have to run the DRC wire, so we can't put this together yet, and he's getting all the wires connected in the corner there in the kick panel. The rear speaker wires are hidden up in here somewhere. Can't see them. That's why they're hidden. That side of the car is all set and ready to go. Let's take a look at the battery, because while I was finishing up wiring these guys, he went ahead and finished up wiring up the battery. Power wire comes down, it loops around here. That brings our ground into position right on to there, as well as our power comes back around and connects right there. This slides into the battery box and holds everything nice and tight and in place. One of the questions we get asked a lot about F-150s is, why do we run a ground to the battery? And the simple answer is because it's aluminum, and we go through that whole thing. We talk about how the car, it's more glued together than welded together. Let me show you something. So back here, right there, that guy, that is a factory ground point, and there's a matching one right over here. Now, how you want to think of those two ground points is like this. When you go into a fuse box, let's say you're on a 10 amp circuit, all right, and you need to pull 5 amps off of that 10 amp circuit. Well, it's a 10 amp circuit. Will you be able to pull 5 amps off of it? Yes, because you have a 10 amp circuit. These are kind of like that, in that this is only designed to handle the amount of amperage that the manufacturer saw fit. Unlike in the past where there was a factory ground in a car, you could go to it because you knew it was a good ground point. These are now rated ground points. So this ground point might only be good for, let's say, 10 amps or 15 amps or 30 amps, but not for the 110 amps that we're gonna be putting in this car. That would be a bad ground point. You get too much resistance between here and the battery. When you get too much resistance, bad things start to happen. One of the things in the A to B NAV TV piece that they tell you is that if you have a resistance higher than 1 ohm, you need to go to the battery. And we've had this discussion with them before. This isn't our first A to B piece. And if you want to get anywhere with them, meaning if you have any issues, the first question they ask is, did you ground it to the battery? The answer to that is yes. So when you're doing one of these cars, just do yourself a favor, go right to the battery. The frame rail, no. Battery, yes. Does that make sense? Yeah. Fernando says yes. And the last piece of the puzzle has fallen into its spot. There it is, all plugged in. Everything is screwed in place. All the panels are attached. So now we just have one big amp rack. It's attached here, it's attached there. There's 2 more attachments over there. Each piece is attached. I still haven't put this one on because I haven't programmed the amplifiers yet. The Zen is all plugged in. The last thing to go in are these 2 cables here. According to the instruction manuals, when programming the bit HD, the last thing you want to do is plug these in. You want to plug it in, tune it, meaning set your crossover points and where everything needs to go. Finalize it, turn it all off, let it reboot, and then you can get into plugging this in and hearing it. So we still got a long way to go as far as that, but we had to make a pit stop because there's one other thing that needs to be taken care of, and that is for this guy, the little DRC. For the most part, all he's going to be using this for is subwoofer volume control. This has presets and all that other fun stuff, but we're not going to be doing that. We're only doing one source, and it fits perfectly right here. This is the gauge cluster, and it's gonna fit right there. But what I need to do first is get this shape and get it into the computer so that I can replicate it and then mount this inside of it. This is gonna take about 2 pieces 1/4 inch. The plan is to cut this out, put it onto this piece of paper, and then we'll scan it into the computer, and that way we can just trace it. I'm using just regular blue painter's tape and a painting knife. This has a really nice edge and will get in there and form that crease. You also want to make sure you have a very sharp blade, because all you want to do is cut the paper and not the plastic behind it. It was kind of funny going to the office supply store and seeing if they just had a regular flatbed scanner without a printer, because I didn't need the printer, I just need the scanner. We have our 2 final pieces. Perfect height. As you can see, there's a slight stagger. We just have to fasten it all together and get it back into the car. Once all the pieces are stacked together, we have a DRC mounted into the dash. Simple and easy to get to. And along with that in the dash, that takes us to pretty much the end of the installation portion of it. Now is the laptop time. We have to plug it in and set up the Bit HD. For that is a Windows computer only. Let's get started. Now, like most times when you first connect up a DSP, it's gonna wanna do some form of a software update. If yours didn't, well, check, because I don't think I've put a DSP in yet that hasn't needed a software update. Have you?
No.
Never. Now, when you hook up the Bit HD, you have to go through the configuration wizard. Every DSP is going to have one of those. And the idea behind it is to tell the DSP what it's connected to and what it's doing. So, for example, channel 1 is going to be tweeter. Channel 2 is going to be the passenger tweeter. You have to tell it these things. Some DSPs will have default settings that you can just, out of the box, click the number 1 and go. Most of them are going to require you to do some form of a setup. That's where we're at right here. This is also one of the only DSPs. There are a few that allow you to choose if you want to do an IIR or an FIR. Google it. We're going to do an IIR configuration with this. We're not going to be using any of the input setups because we're just doing one source and we're doing a Toshlink. We're just going to bang through this. Question 2, optical, no auxiliaries. Next. This page here, master input configuration. What this is telling you is that you're just doing a left and a right, because a Toshlink is just that. It's just left and right. There's no front rear, there's nothing. It's just an audio out of left, audio out of right. And this is the indication that they give you for full range. You also tell it what side of the car you're going to be sitting on. This page is going to tell us how many channels we're going to use. So we're going to be doing tweeter, mid bass, rear fill, and subwoofer. The only caveat on this that's kind of weird is here on the rear. We're not going to be using a woofer. We're going to be using the mid-range, so we can do away with the woofer. Even though it's not going to be active, you have to tell it that you're going to be using a tweeter and a mid-range. That way it'll go ahead and set up a full range output as opposed to a bandpass. Like if I just pick a mid-range, I can put a bandpass filter in there and not give me a tweeter capability. Now I can go in and adjust it, of course, and change that. That's the whole purpose of a pre-setup, is to try to get as close to what you want as possible. Now you just tap on the speaker and it shuts everything off. So we have a front tweeter, a mid woofer, tweeter, mid-range, subwoofer. Select next. This is where you tell it that you're going to be using passive crossovers, this little drop box here. This is just like on the Forza. You tell it if you're going to be doing passive crossover networks. Now it knows that that channel is going to be full range from the mid-range up. Channel assignment. We have to tell it what we want to be what. We're going to reassign these because I don't like their configuration. I want my tweeters to be 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and 7. It's just how my brain works. System setup complete. Now I will tell you, setting it up with the Toshlink was way easier than if we were to have to do high level or any of the other choices. Because with the Toshlink, there's nothing to choose from. It's a full bandwidth signal coming out of the radio, so there's no de-equalization, there's no all-pass filters, there's nothing needed to have to deal with. So let's streamline the input. The other cool thing is if you did need all that, this has de-equalization. It has a ton of features for integrating into a high-level factory system where you have to do summing and all that. After all, this is one of the most advanced DSPs on the market. But we got lucky. Now what we need to do is finalize to Bit 1 HD. When you get the basic setup done on one of these, they extremely recommend, it's in the owner's manual, that you do that. Shut it down, let everything go to sleep, let it do its thing, and then wake it back up. And now you can get to the fun part where we're going to adjust all our settings. And here we are. Now, I don't know what happened between the last scene and now, but I can tell you a lot of time has transitioned. You might have noticed it was dark and now it's light. We're on day 4 of the build right now. Everything is in and everything finally works. Let me explain works. When you're doing a system of any kind of this scale, it doesn't matter. Once you get past having a radio and an amplifier, if you add a DSP, a summing device, or anything like that in the mix, it becomes a more complex system because you have to get things all to work properly. If you're using a factory radio, that adds another little hiccup into this. Any one of these that we do, we put in a certain amount of time and we call it the debugging time. And the debugging time is when we go through and start with something as basic as, do we have audio? Does the radio turn on? Does the amplifier go to sleep when you shut the doors? All the things that you need to step through is the lane departures, the backup camera still work, all those little things. Also is making sure that the equipment turns on. I mean, sometimes you have to crawl before you can actually walk. And in this case, we were barely moving. A couple things happened last night that slowed down the production, but we expected it. One, the nav A to B piece wasn't working with remote turn on, which wasn't a problem because we could still go into the Audison piece, and through the DRC, you could turn on the unit. It was late, we knew nav TV wasn't open. I wasn't stressed out about it because, hey, you know, it's probably something simple, and it turned out to be something simple. It was, okay, now we need to go through the process of setting up the DSP. As we showed you, we went through and we did the I/O setup. The next step on that is going to the actual amplifiers and telling the amplifiers what is doing what. Well, that means we have the two amplifiers. The 5.1 tweeters rear, the 2 front mid bass. The 5.1 is also going to do the sub. So we needed to tell the digital output of the bit HD that those are the channels on which amplifier are going to do what. So you have to go in and program them. Let me show you. So underneath the cool beauty panel is this little display screen here, and it says AV2. That's telling you that this is a Duo 2-channel amplifier. It also has the option for the Uno, the Quattro, and the 5.1 because this is the card we slid into place. On the 5.1, when that powers up, the screen automatically just says 5.1 because it was pre-programmed from the factory. You hit up the setup menu button, you go up and down, and you hit enter. The first question it asks you obviously is what amp it is. The second question it asks you, are you in stereo or mono? And then the third question it asks you is what channels are going to go to which amplifier. So in this case, you have your choice of 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6 and 7. We needed the Duo to be channels 3 and 4, which were the mid bass. And that's kind of where we hit a hiccup. We couldn't get the channels to go where we wanted them to go. So we called up Electromedia and talked to the boss, Lance Doss, who is like, he's the guy, he's been on the show, super dude. Turned out it was something we just totally missed. It was a software update. Top corner here on the software, it gives you the firmware of all the units being used, along with the serial numbers. As it turned out, our DRC needed a software update. We had done the software update for the bit when we plugged it in, like we said. All DSPs need software updates. The DRC isn't part of that. That's a separate update. Once we did that and then we reset the module so that it saw the new firmware, everything worked according to plan and it was wonderful. But at that point we were kind of done because the nav TV wasn't working, and what it wasn't doing wasn't giving us remote turn on output. We had to wait till this morning to call nav TV and figure out what it was. Talk to Bob. Bob's best. It turned out that our remote turn on was pinned in the wrong hole. It was next to the red accessory. It needed to be next to the black ground. So pulled it out, put it down, magically everything turned on. Now we're to the point where we can start tuning. We're gonna do our basic setup. We need to do polarity checks. We need to make sure all 4 corners are playing the way they're supposed to. We need to put the driver's seat back into the factory position, and we need to measure for time alignment. The customer's more Fernando's height than mine, so I'll put him in the seat and then I'll measure. Faded to the rear, we should have no sound because this is the Toshlink output. It only has front, left, and right. All the speakers are making sound and all the speakers are in the right side of the car, which is good. Now we need to do some polarity testing. All our speakers are popping the same direction. That is a good thing. Like we said, it doesn't matter if they're all red, red, green or green, green, red, just so they all go the same direction, or at least the direction you want them to go in. If you want the dash to be out of polarity with the doors, that's fine. It's up to you. Just make sure you know and it's not just a wild guess. 2 of our 3 pre-tests are done. Polarity is good, balance and fader works. One other thing I wanted to stop right here and mention. When working with a factory radio or a aftermarket radio that you're going to an external DSP, make sure the radio is set to flat in the bass, treble, or EQ settings. And also, make sure it's set flat on each source. If your unit has a feature called source tone adjust, that means the source dictates the tone. You can adjust each source differently. Kenwood does that. A lot of radios do that. We've checked it in this one. Fernando likes to do that when he's pulling the car around if he knows we're going to do it in a system, because towards the end it could be several days. Just get it done right off the bat. The third thing on this is we've got the seat lined up. I need to measure Fernando for distance. Bit of a tip, you're measuring to the center of the cone of the speaker, the little dome in the center. That is not located on this surface here. It's located about 2 or 3 inches behind that. When you're taking your measurement, make sure you add in anywhere between 2 to 3 inches of extra measurement for that. If you want to be super like, you can take the measurements before you actually put the door panels back on. Once you get those numbers, you need to enter them into the DSP software. This is where it gets kind of tricky. You need to read your DSP software and see what kind of numbers they're looking for. Some of them, you can simply just take the numbers, put them in, and they'll do all the math for you, meaning they'll find the 0 point. The farthest speaker from your location, they'll subtract that number and add extra footage. So for example, if this was 60 inches away and this was 40 inches away, the number of delay is 20. Certain DSPs will figure that out for you, do the math, and add that delay. They'll take the 20 inches, they'll multiply it by milliseconds of delay, and boom, you're done. Other DSPs want you to do the math beforehand. So 60, 20, they want you to put in 20. They want the 0 point. Some, they actually want you to figure out the milliseconds. So you have to then figure out the distance, find the 0 point, get that number, and then multiply it by time, and then put that number in. It's important to read the instructions. For this, we get the easy. All we have to do is put in the numbers. After all of that information has been put in, it's time to add in the microphone and move everything outside of the car. So we have the RTA connected here, our software up and running here. We're gonna play some pink noise, and we're gonna start the equalization process. Now when doing the equalization, we're gonna start with the passenger side, and then we'll come over to the driver's side. I feel like it's the after hours at a party. We got laptops and cables everywhere. So just spent the better part of a couple hours getting this thing tuned in the way I want it. Now, one of the things that I want to do, use a feature in this EQ that is called Master EQ. Master EQ is a global EQ. That means you have your EQ for each speaker and you get it to where you want it, and you get the alignment good, and you get it sounding the way it's supposed to. But then you just want to sprinkle on a little bit of salt and pepper just to make, you know, a little bit here and there. So you want a little bit more treble, or you want a little bit more mid, or depending on the songs you're listening to. You have the curve that you want, but you want to color it just a little bit. Add some more character to the music. So to do that, we're gonna actually hop into the car and listen to it. That's where the ears come in. Looks great on the RTA. It sounds good, but you just wanna see if you can push it just a little bit further, get a little bit more out of it. If you're sitting in here and listening to it for various, you know, hopping in, jumping in, pink noise, back and forth, wow is the easiest way to describe this. I mean, it's so clear. It's one of those systems that it's so clear that you almost wish there was a little bit of a distortion just so you know it was getting loud, because what happens is it's really loud and it doesn't feel loud. So you go to talk to the person next to you and you're like, then you're yelling at them and you're like, oh my God, that's like really, really loud. So essentially what you do, you copy a preset from A over to one of the other presets. That gives you the ability to toggle back and forth. So you have what is your main tune, and then your salt and pepper tune. Then you can make multiple versions of that. There was like a 2.5, 3 hour period between when I got done tuning it till right now. Fernando hasn't heard it in probably 4 hours. He's not picking it up till tomorrow morning. We have fresh ears. We're just gonna give it one final where we're just gonna listen to everything. We're gonna listen to some Maroon 5. We're gonna listen to some jazz. We're gonna listen to some rock. We're gonna listen to pretty much everything that we have and just make sure that it hits all the spots that we want it to hit. I can tell you right now, and you might agree with me, it's so clear.
Yeah, I'm like right here, and I know on this side it's like, but you can hear this side perfectly nice.
It's like every instrument. It's crazy. And keep in mind, it's a class A on the tweeters. We have a ton of power going to those mid bass. I don't know if we mentioned the sub is actually a T1 Rockford truck box, shallow mount. He just wanted something for bass. I know you guys, but hey, YouTube, copyright.
Yeah, sorry. And I mean, it doesn't matter. You guys not gonna hear it.
You're not gonna enjoy
this. Yeah, no.
Right, well, we're gonna enjoy it, so.
I'll let you know how.
You let them know? Okay. Now, one last piece before we wrap it up. Fernando's inside jamming out. because he's just going with the basic Rockford box, the front of it's carpeted black, we decided to make this guy here go in the front, make it a little bit more pretty. You good? Did you get your fill? This is what we're doing in your car next?
That's what we're gonna do in the car.
Is that what we're doing? I gotta get a hold of Audison and we gotta get some Voce amplifiers.
Voce amplifiers. I'm still thinking about
Yeah?
This is
Oh, slow down. You know, hey, instead of that, you know, we have a Forza Prima sitting right here. We could do those.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a little more our speed.
Dude, man, this is crystal clear.
Crystal clear?
Dude,
All right, guys. Well, that's gonna end this one. We hope you enjoyed this.
I did.
You enjoyed it? The one takeaway I will say, if you're going to be doing any form of Audison product, make sure when you're doing the DSP, you finalize it every time you do something major.
Every time you do a change.
Every time you do a change, well, not every time you do a change. Anytime you do a drastic change. So like if you've tuned the left side, now you're working on the right side, go ahead and hit finalize. You can also save the file, export it out and save it like every other DSP. Strongly recommend doing that. The nice thing about it is you can do that. Not all DSPs are as easy as this to save. Nothing sucks worse than losing your tune. I will say I did it at one point when we were doing this. I didn't actually lose it, I just changed presets. So I was like, oh, phew. I had to step away for a moment because we were like really far into it and I was like, oh man, and then I was like, oh, yeah, hey, there it is, good call, Dean. I also would like to give a big shout out to the boss, Lance Doss, for helping us set this system up. We used him as consultation early on when we were putting the system together with the clients. He came through to help us get everything set up in the car. Awesome there. And of course, Bob, Nav TV. Bob, he's the man. You got anything else to add?
I'm gonna keep listening. So, on to the next one, guys.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this. We'll see you later next time.
Bye.